Hello, welcome to the Tea Party Howdy channel. So we're going to review the series called Disney Imagineering and the dream of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at, there were 6 episodes. They ran over an hour each, like a couple of minutes, like an hour and 1 minute. So we're going to review each one in brief. Not going to give away too many spoilers at all. We'll let you know what you can expect in them as far as which rides they talk about and how they're manufactured a little bit, things like that. Some of the big names that drop by for the interviews. But by way of introduction, if you are not a Disneyland or Disney theme park fan, this show may be very, very boring for you because that is what it's about. It's about theme parks from beginning to end. Let's see, what else? If you're a Disney fan of the theme parks, oh, this is right up your alley. You should enjoy this a lot. What's interesting about it from an outsider's point of view is, do they and how do they tackle the negative aspects of their history in regards to the theme parks? And the way that it plays out is very fascinating, and I think that has a lot to do with who produced it, because it's produced by the iWorks family. Now, if you don't know who iWorks is, then you're not a Disney fan. But if you are a Disney fan and you still don't know who iWorks is, you need to look it up, because iWorks was Walt Disney's best friend after high school. iWorks was his partner in business through his earliest days with the what were they called? The Alice comedies, and they worked. iWorks was the technical genius that invented most of all of the early days technical advancements was iWorks. So the multiplane camera, as an example. They had a couple of falling outs, as everybody who's best friends does, but eventually they all made up, and now their kids are producing this. And because it's done by the iWorks family, and because there are no Disney heirs, there's like, talk about shirt tail relatives. Because there's no Disney heirs, there's no one close to the corporation from a family point of view, because it's literally a corporation now. It's not, there is no Disney human being involved in Disney anymore, and there hasn't been for some time. And boy, does that play out, including in this series. So that's all that. Let's get into the actual show now that we know that you're interested in this information. So here we go. In the first episode, it starts out with a short history of Walt Disney. And if you are a well-read fan of Walt Disney's history, this is a great summary. And you're like, oh yeah, I knew that. Oh, it's good to see it again. Oh, so cool. Very good reminders. If you are not well-read on the early days of Walt Disney, this is a really, really good starting point. Because of the summary, the way that they do it, it gives you gives you a lot of the names and places that you can begin chasing those rabbits down the rabbit holes, because now you know they exist. So there's how that works. Then they get started with the history of Disneyland and how it came to be. Again, it's a summary. It's not in detail. None of this show is in detail. It's all just looking at, as Disney would do so often, the facade. But by seeing the facade, you again know which rabbits to chase down which rabbit holes. So it's excellent for that. Now, the musical score for the show is, whoever wrote it was definitely with a vibe of Game of Thrones. And I liked the music. I didn't like it for the show. And yeah, that happens sometimes. So like as a standalone, oh, it's really cool music. But it's no Disney sparkle in it at all. It's in the low range and mid-tones, and Disney's not like that. Disney fills the sound spectrum. It's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow. I mean, it's all over the place now. So, all right. What else can you expect in the first episode? Let's see. Walt's history, Disneyland's. Oh, you get to meet some of the Disneyland legends. So, again, if you're well-read on Disneyland's history, it's really fun to see some of the people that they get to interview. There's lots more than they interview. All you need to do is walk down Main Street of Disneyland, if it should ever reopen, and look at the windows, because in the windows of Main Street, those names that are on those windows in Main Street, those are all Disney legends. So in case you didn't know that, check it out next time you're there, if it ever opens. And so you get to see some. I mean, for me, it was like really exciting to see Dick Nunes again. I'm like, wow, cool. And one of the cool things about this show is, even though they're doing interviews, they don't do like so many documentaries do, and only do interviews of the immediacy. They use historical interviews. In other words, interviews by people from decades ago, months ago, years ago. Several of them are dead now, so it was it's really sad that so many documentaries can't get their hands on prior ones for whatever reason. All right. This was for me the best thing about this episode. At a little bit over 57 minutes into the show, assuming you don't have commercials, they're talking about the greatest prestige ride ever created by Disneyland and arguably the Disney Corporation, and that is, of course, Pirates of the Caribbean ride. And at that marker, that time marker, the lady who's doing the narration, she says quite plainly that they changed the rides to adjust to current social mores. And that is from the modern era. And it's disgusting. It's really bad when they change the rides for... You know how to put the words social mores in a different context? Social justice warriors. And what about another context? Politically correct. Pick your expression. It's all based on the politics for today. And the script had her say, after saying that they adjust to the social mores, the current ones. Yeah, and there's a reason it's called current, because it's still flowing. Whereas the timelessness and the awesomeness of the original Pirates, yeah, it gets ripped out and buried. Well, anyways, she mentions after that it's done so that the ride can remain timeless. Well, if you have to keep updating it, I think you're subtracting from your argument that it's timeless. And the amount of political correctness that has been done, in particular to Pirates of the Caribbean, is really, really shameful. Now, when they talk about, and we'll address it again in one of the other episodes, when they talk about how the effect played out on It's a Small World, that was different because they weren't changing it for politically correct reasons. Well, though they did have to change the boats because they were sinking because Americans had become so unbelievably obese. Yep, that's why they changed the boats. The boats were sinking. All right, episode 2. Life After Walt. Ooh, it starts rough if you're a Walt fan because everybody's crying and everything. Like, nah. One of the most popular expressions, and again, if you're a Disneyland fan and you know its history, you will know the expression echoed for at least a decade after Walt died. What would Walt do? And yeah, so they address that issue. And they introduce you to the groundbreaking of Disney World and how Roy was affiliated with that. They introduce you to Tokyo Disneyland, and they talk about the mistakes that they made in creating Tokyo Disneyland and how they went in and fixed it. Luckily, that's going to be a recurring theme through the show. Not that they make mistakes, but that they repair them. Not as fast as some of us would prefer, but nonetheless, they do get around to it. And then, at the end, they do the cliffhanger as, is this the end of Walt Disney Imagineering? Because the company was doing really bad in the late 80s financially. The parks were not getting the attendance. You may not know this or not, but Disneyland was only open a few days a week until Eisner took over. It wasn't a 7-day-a-week park, and its hours were just embarrassing. It was only open till 7 o'clock at night on the weeknights, on the nights that it was open. When we were little, we used to live real close, and we would go over there, and we'd just go for a few hours. And and it was also affordable to get into that you could do that, because trust me, my family was anything but wealthy. All right, so that's episode 1. Episode 2, let's take a look at episode 3. Now Eisner and Wells come in. Now what's really fascinating about this episode is they introduce Eisner and they introduce Frank Wells, and this is the biggest spotlight I have ever seen on Frank Wells. So that was really exciting for me, because, again, if you know the history of Disneyland or Disney, it's a big deal. But what they leave out, and boy, do they leave it out. They never mention Katzenberg's name in this. And to leave out Katzenberg's name when you're talking about Eisner and Wells, yeah, I understand it has to do with the animation and not the theme park. But the animation is what gave us The Little Mermaid and Sleeping Beauty and all these other characters that you see represented in the show. And they never, ever mention Katzenberg. Apparently, in the bad blood of the way that all went down, Eisner came out better because they interview him a lot, and there is no mention of Katzenberg, which is kind of fun too because they keep showing the building of Walt Disney Imagineering, and it turns out that Walt Disney Imagineering, they had to sell half of their building. I don't know when, but not too long ago because the architecture is new, and the other half of the building is owned by DreamWorks, which is Spielberg, Katzenberg, and Geffen. So they are neighbors, but they are not friendly neighbors, apparently. All right, so what's in episode 3? You get introduced to the resurrection of Walt Disney Imagineering because not Katzenberg, Eisner and Wells loved it, and they wanted the theme park to kick booty again, and holy macaroni, did they do it, and they did it fast. They did it really fast. Within like 2 years, it was like, ooh, that's when everybody I know started going all the time. And then eventually they'd introduce the annual passes, and then everything was downhill. Okay, so you get to see the introduction of Star Wars tours. Then you go over to Disney World, and they introduce you to the foundation of MGM. And then they come back to Disneyland and talk about Splash Mountain. Again, aficionados are going to know this stuff, but it's still fun to watch. And then you have Euro Disney introduced, and they talk quite boldly how that was a complete flop and a total disaster. And then they talked about how they repaired it and how they were humbled by it. They're not shy about that. Then they come over to Florida again and talk about the Tower of Terror. Then they go to California and do Indiana Jones ride. And then at the very end, do I want to tell you this or do I want to let you see it? I'll let you see it. So there's something big that happens at the end. Episode 4. Now we're in the modern era, and we start off with a longtime employee who's now aged, because we see a lot of these guys, they show them in all their different ages. And he has, in his left ear, you know those discs that you can put in your ear to stretch them out like crazy? He's not wearing that, but he clearly had, and now he's got an earring with all these feathers and chains hanging out. Oh my God, it's an acquired taste that I have not acquired. So if you haven't either, ooh. And what you also see starting in this episode is now you're getting closer to the modern era, and the concept of dress codes from the employees is clearly gone, as exhibited in several of the people that are interviewed. Not so much in episode 4, but from 5 on. But there are some in 4. Like the guy with the loop beard, like, dude, really? Okay, they introduce you to the first Disney Cruise Line ship being created. Then they introduce you to Disney Americana, which was going to be in one of the Virginias, and it did not make it because everybody who lived in that area said, you're not building that here, you're not going to come in, do your little fake history, and then trash history. Which is interesting because that was going on before they really started trashing history. Disney. But again, as exemplified in Pirates of the Caribbean, they would start and they would dig in deep. And then they did it, they don't mention this in the show, but Tom Sawyer's Island in Disneyland, holy mackerel, have they redone that to make it just phenomenally politically correct, which is another way of saying not true. If it's politically correct, that's the clue. Correct doesn't need a prefix. It ain't correct. It's, oh my God, it's awful. And same thing happened to Pirates of the Caribbean, where they just, man, this history is just bad, which is really brutal because if you think about what Tom Sawyer's Island was created for, as well as Adventureland, it was supposed to show you, quote, Walt Disney, the hard facts that built America. Oh, those hard facts have been squished and crumbled and turned into dust, not even pixie dust, and then I don't know where they were disposed of, but they're probably frozen underneath It's a Small World or Haunted Mansion, but they don't exist anymore. So that's why it rejected, and boy, were they wise, because can you imagine do you dare imagine what Disney Americana would look like in 2020, where people are getting fired all over the place for wrongthink? Oh, it would not be pretty. They also introduce you to the animal kingdom. Then they introduce you, though not by name and only by a couple of clips, the absolute failure that was Rocket Rods. 3.5 hours I waited in line for that ride, and I'm like, this was not worth 3.5 hours. And it just constantly kept breaking, and then it just went away, and they never ever replaced it. Now that track is up there with nothing on it. All right, now what have we got? Then they show you Japan's Disney Sea, SEA. Wow, is it beautiful. It's really beautiful. Then they introduce you to Paul Pressler as he comes in and becomes the boss of Disneyland. Then they talk a teeny bit about Disney California Adventures. They introduce you to Soaring Over California and talk about, well, at least that was beloved. And then they go to Disney Hong Kong, and then that's where that wraps up. Then in episode 5, you have, again, as we alluded to earlier, this is when the guardrails go off. The guardrails go off? Whatever. You go off the guardrails, and there's people with tattoos, dudes with seriously long hair. Like, how many of these dudes are going to have earrings in their left ear? A lot of them. At least some of their ears are intact, unlike that one fellow. And now we are introduced to the Bob Iger era, where he buys everything. They stop producing original content, and they just buy everything else. They don't mention that they stopped making original content, but they do show you all the IPs he bought. Then and Iger straight up says, right, in one of the interviews, like, yeah, the animation, no, we're all about the theme parks again. Yeah, and the animation has never recovered, because can you name the last 3 Disney animated films? Because I can guarantee you, when Eisner was there, you could, because they were the next Disney classic. Everyone went to the theater. It's the newest Disney classic. I'm not sure you know how the word classic works, but whatever. Okay, you're also introduced to, then they show you how they rebuilt Disney California Adventure and took all the California out and made it Arizona. Though they don't tell you it's Arizona, it's like, dude, look at the desert, watch the movie, that's Highway 66, and that's Arizona. So Disney California Adventure failed, but Disney Arizona Adventure seemed to work out okay. Cars Land and the World of Color, how they turned the ocean that used to exist in DCA into a gigantic water light show. They show the Haunted Mansion and It's a Small World being redone. They show Haunted Mansion being redone for the holidays, for Halloween. And I know there was a lot of hoopla for that, and I went and seen them like, God, they did it such on the cheap. And it's weird because they do talk about going out on the cheap for Disney California Adventure and some of the other things, but they don't mention it on that. It's like, no, they definitely did it on the cheap. The It's a Small World rebuild was not on the cheap because they had to redo the boats because people were sinking them. Then they introduce you to the fact that they bought Marvel. Then they tease Star Wars, and they show you some really awesome tech secrets behind the scenes. In case you want to know how the new rides work, they start doing it in that episode. And then they complain about smartphones. I don't blame them. And then they show you Hong Kong and their Haunted Mansion, which they decided we're going to do a whole new script. And it's really, really fun. When you unleash Imagineers, you get some amazing things. Then they show you Ratatouille in Paris. And again, you unleash the Imagineers. Holy moly moly. And then they show the Tokyo earthquake. I don't know why. It's really devastating. Okay, and then it takes us to the last episode, where we get to see Shanghai Disney, and we get to see Bob Iger kissing the booty of the lovely leader of China, Communist China. Okay, then you get to see the Pirates, Shanghai Pirates ride, which again, they did it based on the movies, not the other way around, and it's phenomenal. Wouldn't want it to replace the original Pirates. I personally, I'd like to have the original Pirates of the Caribbean back. Anyways. But it's something. And then they show you the Tron World, which I just seen, because when they reopened Disney's Shanghai after the pandemic, and that was the first Disney park to reopen. That was the first time I'd ever seen the World of Tron that they have. It's like, oh my God, that's beautiful. And we got stuck with that hideous, not Star Wars Land, the 99-cent store version of Star Wars Land. No offense to the 99-cent store. Then they show you Pandora and how that works, and that was kind of cool. Then they show you the Guardians of the Galaxy ride, and how Tower of Terror was converted. And then, because it's the end of the show, it's the end of the season, it's before the pandemic, they show you Galaxy's Edge, and then they talk about the rise of the Resistance ride. What's interesting is after they spent so much time apologizing and saying, we spent 10 years on the cheap, and now we've spent the next 10 years trying to repair the damage to bring the people back. Well, the pandemic is giving them plenty of time to go in and fix Galaxy's Edge and turn it into Star Wars Land instead of not Star Wars Land. However, as you see in this show all the way through, Disney is a company built on cinema, which has been closed for 3 months. And it's also built on boats, where people are crammed together, and rides where people are crammed together. They are in dire straits galore. So they don't have money. They've been borrowing billions and billions of dollars throughout the pandemic to do it. So how they make corrections now, I don't know. And now that the world is turned upside down because of the pandemic wasn't enough, the lockdown wasn't enough, now we have the riots to deal with and the aftermath and the political correctness that's following the aftermath, with everybody getting fired from their job who disagrees with the people that are... If you disagree with the people that are using their First Amendment rights to free speech, you get fired. Yeah, if you speak against the people using their right, not yours, don't be stupid, their right to free speech, then you get fired. And I'm going to make videos about that galore if I haven't already. So anyways, that's it for this. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you are a Disney fan and you haven't checked this out, you really should. If you're a Disneyland fan and you haven't checked this out, whoa, wakey, wakey, eggs and bakey, it's time to do some looking. If you are neither of those, why do you have Disney Plus? Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the future.